Welcome to the program today. My name is Mondo Gonzalez here with a prophecy update for you, and I have a special guest in studio, Olivier Melnick. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, Mondo.
And Olivier has been in here filming a program with Gary about Olivier's book. He has a book called End Times Anti-Semitism, which I think is a very fascinating topic, which most people do not really take the time to really understand, and we're going to get to the bottom of that today. But for our audience, this is the first time you've been here. Kind of share a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where'd you come from?
I was born and raised in France, in Paris, France, of a Jewish family, Jewish parents, Holocaust survivors, my parents. Met my American wife in the early 80s in France. She led me to the Lord, and through the rapture. That's what scared me into believing, but that's for another time. And we moved back, got married, moved back to the States, and then got involved in ministry slowly but surely. The Lord put a burden on me after I became a believer to share the gospel message with my Jewish people. So it was progressive, starting going to church and going to a Wednesday night study at church, then leading a study, then deciding to go to school, same school you went to, and then on and on and on, and full-time ministry now as a missionary with Chosen People Ministries for the last 24 years, and I currently serve, we just moved there, currently serve as a Southwest Regional Director for Chosen People Ministries in the Dallas Metroplex.
Mm-hmm. This is really important because, Olivia and I both, we met in Dallas here at one of the other conferences and realized that we were both at Moody just a few years apart. But
yes.
One of the things that was great about what we learned there is just Jewish evangelism, Jewish history, Jewish backgrounds, Jewish theology, really the culture, which you obviously lived part of it anyway.
Yes.
But for me, it was great to really learning the background of the Bible. I mean, in thinking about that, many people would say, well, why are you doing a Jewish studies program? I go, well, if Jesus was Chinese, I'd be doing a Chinese, background study, but we know that Jesus was born in a specific place at a specific time. And one of the things that we learned in school, which people can certainly get on their own, but was the idea of really church history. And church history it's kind of embarrassing when you think about the church-Jewish relation. It's very sad, and it brings up the topic of what you've written in this particular book of end times and anti-Semitism. And what I want to do today for this prophecy update, and we'll get to a little bit in a minute, but let's define anti-Semitism. I think sometimes people think they might understand what it is, but let's get a definition.
Well, before we go into the definition, something needs to be said that a lot of people, I meet a lot of people in the conferences and the speaking engagements that I go to, when they say, well, I thought that anti-Semitism was over after the Holocaust, it came to an end, and really what happened, it was swept under the carpet. It was not in the forefront for a while because it became taboo. So much harm had been done to the Jews, rightfully so. People thought, this is it, never again, which is a Jewish motto. So people thought, okay, this is not going to happen again. And eventually it came back, and it came back in the form of the new anti-Semitism. And then I think it morphed again about 10 years ago in what I call in my book end times or eschatological anti-Semitism. The entire, the three brands of anti-Semitism, classical, new, and end times anti-Semitism, really can fall under the same definition. That's a long answer for a short question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like it.
So it would be anti-Semitism is the irrational hatred of the Jewish people in Israel, characterized by thoughts, words, and deeds, or a combination of the three. Mm-hmm. So anti-Semitism is the irrational hatred of the Jewish people in Israel, characterized by thoughts, words, or deeds.
It's interesting as Olivier mentions that because, one of the things that we want to do here, or I like to do, is we talk about a prophecy update, and we follow the trends. That's kind of a good idea or good description. And when we think about prophetic trends as we look forward to Jesus' second coming and the arrival of the day of the Lord, the 7-year tribulation, there's a lot of different trends. We talk about maybe the preparation for the temple in Israel. We see those going behind the scenes, and we watch that. Even the nation Israel itself becoming a nation, we're watching that. Their 1967 really conquering of Jerusalem and taking that back. We see trends of one world government. We've been talking a lot about that lately. Tyranny, political systems shaping itself into things. But one of the things that we have not talked about, which I think is appropriate, is this idea of prophetically speaking that anti-Semitism would increase. We know during the tribulation period there's going to be certainly a hatred by the beast and the dragon against Jews worldwide. And so when you think about that at the end of the 7 years or during the 7-year period, remember, things don't happen overnight. The mark of the beast, technology and culture doesn't just happen overnight. There's these processes and these stages that help build the systems, the societies, even the thinking of people. So when we think about anti-Semitism or anti-Jewishness, especially during the tribulation period, what I see here is kind of what you wrote in the book, which I think is awesome in the sense of how you articulated it. It's educating us to be aware. Let's talk about specifically what you mean in the sense of end times anti-Semitism.
Well, end times anti-Semitism, going back to the definition that I gave, my definition is very close to a lot of other definitions. I've added the word irrational, which I think is very important because one thing that we believers understand that the rest of the secular scholar who give us definitions, who have done great work on anti-Semitism, we understand that anti-Semitism is a spiritual battle. It comes from Satan. It comes from the enemy of God. He hates everything that God loves and loves everything that God hates. And Satan has the ability to make the irrational rational. This is why you see people on the extreme left of the political spectrum hold hands with radical Muslims on the issue of going after Israel. When really, if you take Israel out of the equation, extreme left and radical Islam, liberal left and radical Islam really don't agree on anything. You put them in a room, they'll kill each other. But you put them in a room discussing how can we go after Israel, all of a sudden the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's how irrational it can get. And I've got other examples. The end times anti-Semitism, I have yet to see anybody else see that progression. I think that after the closing of the end of the war and the end of the Holocaust, 1945, within 3 years we have the birth of the modern state of Israel. Jews are going back to the land. Actually they started before that, but up to the Holocaust there was a certain kind of classic anti-Semitism. Then we have this new anti-Semitism where the victims become the perpetrators and the perpetrators become the victims. The Jews become the new Nazis of the Middle East, the apartheid people, the occupiers, the colonizers, and then the Palestinian, thanks to the 50-year now narrative of Arafat and anybody following him, and the Palestinians become the victim, the displaced people. I mean, that's for another show altogether. We don't have time for that, but it's been switched. And then what I see is a hybrid of classic anti-Semitism and the new anti-Semitism, adding one more aspect is the fact that now, under end times anti-Semitism, starting in 2012, Jews are being killed again, leading to what could be another large numbers of Jewish people being killed if we let it continue. Now we know God is on Israel's side, but still, often what I do is I have a fair understanding of what's happening in Europe, being from there. What I do is I look at what's happening in Europe, Eastern, Western Europe, mostly Western Europe really right now, and I see it as a precursor of what's coming to the States and the rest of the world. And I see right now what's happening in France, in England, in other countries of Western Europe, and Jews are being killed again. 2012 is when I think the first one that really had an impact is when a Muslim walked in that supermarket and took hostages, and at the end killed 4 of the hostages, 4 Jewish people. He walked in on a Friday afternoon during the shopping for Shabbat. I mean, very in a kosher supermarket, very targeted. And I remember our current president at the time, I'll let people do the math, said that this really had nothing to do with the Jewish community. We'll leave it at that. But that supermarket was 50 yards from that supermarket was one of my nieces lived there. She was in the store 15 minutes prior to the guy coming.
Wow.
Shopping for Shabbat. Went home to start cooking, and then she turned the TV on and she goes like, wait a minute, what's going on? And it was like Nick, she could open the window and see what was happening. And I was watching from Seattle at the time. I lived in Seattle. And I'm going, this is crazy. And so I called my family to make sure everybody was okay. I talked to my mom. My mom at the time was 87. My mom saw her father taken out of the house where she still lived in at the time, in that outskirts of Paris, right next to the supermarket. He was taken by the Gestapo, died in Auschwitz. She was scarred for life. Lost her faith in God until she came to the Lord at the very end of her life. But here's my mom. I call her and I go, Mom, stay put, close the door. My sister who lives in the area, her name is Brigitte. Brigitte will come. She'll take care of you. Don't go out. She was out that morning right by that store. I've been to that store many times. And here's my mom starting crying on the phone. When she was 15, her dad was taken by the Gestapo in front of her eyes. Died in Auschwitz. She starts crying, age 87, and she goes, Olivier, are they coming back for us? I didn't know what to say. Mm-hmm. So, and that's 2015. 2017, and I'll finish with that on the how it's getting bad. A woman was attacked by a Muslim neighbor who threw her out of the window of her apartment in Paris, Jewish woman, and he recited verses from the Quran saying, I've killed my Jew. And he threw her out of the second floor. She died, of course, and her name was Sarah Halimi. And 4 years later, there was supposed to be a trial, 2011, and the trial was dismissed before it was even started because they realized the man was high on pot, so he was not responsible for his actions, so he walked free. Not even a trial saying, okay, you're not guilty. They said, we're not going to have a trial. We're not going to have a trial because he was high on cannabis. And in France, if you throw your dog out of the window, if you throw your dog out of the window in France, you get a year in prison. If you throw a Jew out of the window and you're high on cannabis, you walk free. What is that saying to the Jewish community of France? So connecting the dots here, I see, and this is a little bit, I don't want to be dogmatic on this, but there is possibly a connection between the rise of anti-Semitism and the return of the Jews to the land of Israel, because there's nowhere safe for them. And we know in the end times that the Jews will go back to the land in unbelief, in the later chapters of Ezekiel. And Mondo, if I was to go to the bank with one prophecy about the Jews being fulfilled today, I would say for the last several decades, it's the Jews going back in large number in unbelief.
I hear what you're saying, and it's so horrible. I hope, when you hear these stories, it's just so sad and it's tragic. And when we think scripturally speaking, that, again, we understand what the Bible says in the end times and about, again, the hatred of the Jewish people being a satanic hatred. Again, all you got to do is read Revelation 12, and you'll see that satanic hatred that is there. On that, you're talking about this trial that didn't happen. What was the response of the public?
Mixed. The vast majority of the public didn't really care or didn't say much. The Jewish community was, all over the whole thing, and they were and I really think that since 2012 I've been following Jewish community leaders and friends saying France is done for us. It's not safe anymore. I mean, I remember I go to Paris twice a year for board meetings for chosen people, and I remember, walking one day. I was, walking in the streets, doing some shopping, and there was what do you call it when people walk on the street and a protest? Mm-hmm. It was a protest, a pro-Palestinian protest, okay, pro-Palestinian protest, and all they were saying was Jews back to the ovens. Subtle, very subtle. So it was not really pro-Palestinian, it was anti-Semitic.
And what year was this? 17? No, it had to be a little bit later, right?
Yeah, 17 is 5 years ago. No, it was actually a little before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, in the last 5 years, you think about that. One of the phrases that Olivier mentioned, is that never again, never again. That's kind of the phrase that comes out of really the Holocaust itself. And yet, here we are in modern times.
Jews back to the oven? Seriously. You get all the time now, Hitler didn't kill enough Jews. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating to me in my studies, I've noticed that there are people all over the world who are anti-Semitic, who have never interacted with a Jewish person in their lifetime. They just have, I hate the Jews, I hate Israel. So, I think to connect more dots here, we need to help our audience. The reason why, we know Satan is the creator of anti-Semitism, but why? What does he care?
Yeah.
Because he knows that when Jesus said, sure you'll not see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, blessed is you who comes in the name of the Lord. That's when he comes back. The second coming of Jesus is going to be triggered by Israel calling upon him. People don't think about it that way. They go, well, all people that are supposed to be saved will be saved. He comes back. Well, that's true too. That's part of it. But the reason, it doesn't matter how many people get saved, the reason that brings him back for the second coming, at the end of the 7-year tribulation, is Israel calling upon him with the FPS and mourning for him as one mourns for an only son. Zechariah 12:10. So Satan knows that when that happens, his career is over. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't like his Hollywood portrays Satan as the boss of hell. He's not the boss of hell. He's one of the first ones thrown in the lake of fire for eternity of torment with no relief. Yeah. And so he doesn't want to go there. So if he can stop the Jews from calling upon Yeshua, then it's not going to happen. Then he's okay. So anti-Semitism, keeping the Jews from Jesus, Christian anti-Semitism, then he's been doing this for 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. And he's unfortunately done a great job.
Yeah. When we think about what Olivier is saying, and we, again, scripturally speaking, this hatred comes directly from Satan himself. And, in Revelation 12, you see this prophetic scenario of where it says very clearly that he has a short time, and he immediately takes his focus and he goes after the woman who is Israel in that chapter. You mentioned a couple things, and I want to have a clarification follow-up. You mentioned in passing, and I know someone might notice this. You said, well, God is on Israel's side. Does that mean that everything that Israel does today politically is right, is correct, God endorses it? Let's clarify that. What do you mean by God is on Israel's side?
Biblically speaking, God is not done with Israel. God not being done with Israel does not mean that God is giving Israel a free get-out-of-jail pass because they're Jews. Okay? What it means that if God is not done with Israel, if the church has not replaced Israel, that's called replacement theology, and this is not a biblical doctrine. This is invented. This is jealousy. This is false doctrine. A replacement theology is not in the Bible. So God has not replaced Israel with anything, because his covenants with Israel, going back to the Abrahamic covenant and the Davidic covenant, the Lang covenant, the New covenant, they're all unconditional, eternal, except for the Mosaic, also with Israel, but it's conditional. But all those are unconditional, eternal. If God reneges on his covenants, he's a covenant breaker and he's a liar. So it's good, it's solid, you can take it to the bank. So God is not done with Israel. God is not done with the Jewish people. Now, the other side of that coin is Israel perfect in the eyes of God? No. I don't agree with what the Israeli government does. I mean, first of all, you'd have to be watching every day because government changes every hour and a half, sure. So, almost. But I don't agree with everything. But biblically speaking, Israel will never be forsaken by God. I think the best scripture for that is in Jeremiah 31, 35 through 37. And I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but when God says, if you can destroy the moon and the stars and measure the earth and the heavens, then I will forsake Israel. And that's just, it's God's way of saying, no way, Jose. Yep. I'm not going to do it. So we know that that's not going to happen. And what was the original question? Because I always get carried away. I'm so passionate.
Well, just the idea of making that distinction of how God is on Israel's side.
Yes. God is on Israel's side. Biblically speaking, God has not reneged Israel. God has not rejected Israel. God has not forgotten Israel. But that does not mean that God is telling Jewish people, you're in. Read John 3, Nicodemus. He is a perfect example right there of a Pharisee who thought, who was like following Yeshua, going like, this guy's different. And what is it? So he goes to see him at night, and he's asking him, and then Jesus tells him, you got to be born of the water and born of the Spirit. Firstborn, first birth, second birth, spiritual birth, born again. And so, and Nicodemus thought for sure, I'm Jewish, I'm a leader of the community, I'm good standing, I mean, I'm super Jew. If super Jew has got to be super saved. And Jesus says, super not.
Exactly, he calls it right out.
So what that means is that, to our audience is basically, Israel is still in God's plan, but Israel needs Jesus just like everybody else. The Jewish people need to hear about the gospel. They need to hear about salvation through Yeshua, Jesus, because nobody comes to the Father but through the Son. And it's not easy because we have to contextualize in a way that is not going to make us sound anti-Semitic, because some people say like the New Testament is anti-Semitic. We don't have time for that, but of course it's not. So we have to contextualize the gospel, not compromise. Some people do too much compromising. So some people will say even that some Christians will not at all preach the gospel, saying too much has been done in the name of Christianity, a lot of harm, a lot of persecution, so leave the Jews alone. This is known as dual covenant theology. I don't think it's found in the Bible either. I mean, Jesus is for everybody. It's the same Jesus for everybody. And honestly, Mondo, when I look at dual covenant theology, which is leave the Jews alone, they're in no matter what, or replacement theology, push the Jews aside because the church has replaced them. In both cases, this is what I would label as soft anti-Semitism. Not hardcore, but soft anti-Semitism. At the end of the day, it's still anti-Semitism.
Yeah. I think it's really important because this is a good clarification that cannot be repeated enough, because there is so much confusion really in modern Christianity, because people have gotten away from really teaching the Bible. And that is understanding really the unconditional nature, as you mentioned, of the covenants of God. But to say that God is on Israel's side, exactly what that means is God is faithful to his covenants, and he has a future for them, and he is going to fulfill all of them. It also recognizes really the idea that when you think about modern Israel and the political Israel, that they are there, they have an appointment of destiny with God for this 70th week, where they're going to have a very tough conversation. In their affliction, they will seek him, and the goal is to get them really to the Messiah. That's, God's heart. It doesn't give a blanket endorsement for everything that happens. And oftentimes, when you see in the modern church, those that are anti-Israel, they're anti the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, or the soft anti-Semitism. Right. I think that they build these straw men of Christian Zionism. We hear that word out there as well. But I think they forget, and our goal here is to educate, so that when we come to this point, we want you to say, no, let me just ask you, how can a Christian, or why should a Christian, two questions, how and why, support the state of Israel? We know that they're in a state of unbelief. Mm-hmm. Paul in Romans 9-11, we know that passage, that he longs for them to know their Messiah because they're lost. They are lost. He says they have a zeal not according to knowledge. How and why can a Christian support
how
the Jewish
is,
people?
Why? Let's do why first. Why? You go back to the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, 1-3, and in verse 3 it says that will bless those who bless you and will curse him who curses you. So God has this, I think it's Arnold Fruchtenbaum who calls this verse God's foreign policy as it pertains to Israel. You bless the Jews, I'll bless you. You curse the Jews, I'll curse you. And you see it through the Bible, and you see it beyond the Bible. We could talk for another hour of examples of those who blessed the Jews and how they were blessed in and out the Bible, and those who cursed and they were cursed. Okay, but then there's in some, that was my one of the first thing that our common professor at Moody had me work on this on a message, and this is what started the whole thing for me on anti-Semitism, was a sermon on Psalm 83. Dr. Rydelnik asked me to put a sermon together, and I did that, and next thing you know, here I am after 22 years talking about anti-Semitism still. But some Christians I meet today, they don't want to say they're anti-Semitic, but they have issues with the Jewish people. They have issues with Israel. They're struggling. And they go like, well, I don't hate the Jews. I just don't believe Israel is doing the right thing, and those poor Palestinians. And they throw all those false narratives. They don't really back it up with anything. And I also meet Christians that just don't like the Jews. Yeah. And I challenge him with this part, the first 5 verses of Psalm 83, if I
Please
read it. O God, do not keep silence, do not hold your peace, or be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they conspire with one accord. Against you they make a covenant. Verse 5, critical. Those who hate Israel, those who want Israel to be destroyed, they conspired with one accord against you. They make a covenant. If you call yourself a Christian, I'm telling you, not you. If you call yourself a Christian and you hate Israel and you hate the Jews, then you have to examine your heart. I'm not saying you're not a Christian. Just say examine your heart. Because a true believer, a follower of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a follower of the God of Israel, cannot hate the Jews and hate Israel. So just examine your heart. Right there, why? Genesis 12:3, we're supposed to bless the Jewish people. We'll be blessed as a result. And a true follower of God cannot hate Israel.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things, too, in thinking about this topic is one of the best things you do to bless Israel, preach the gospel to them. I mean, they need Jesus. You know, there isn't this different, as Olivier mentioned, this dual way to get saved. And which is really a sad thing. I think that's just a lie of Satan. You'd probably agree. It's a lie of Satan.
Absolutely.
Because it prevents the preaching of the gospel. I mean, you see Paul's heart again in Romans 9 through 11. Let's talk a little bit as well, because what I've been seeing and watching over the years is I lived for 9 years in the Chicago area, and there's a lot of influential colleges and seminaries in the area, and I've been watching, and churches too. And it's not just there, but what I found was you have many of the modern denominations, maybe you're part of some of them, they're large denominations, they are coming out, and a lot of them are adherents of the replacement theology mentality.
And
but
BDS?
The boycotting, the divesting.
Sanctions.
Yep. You see this, again, on a denominational scale, these Christian people who are picking sides, truly, some very unequally in many ways. They lack some theological precision, and that's really what I see. But what do you say? What's some of the background here behind these modern Christian movements? You talk a lot about it in the book.
Get the book. No, just
yeah. Well, true. Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. The BDS movement is really not that old. It's 2005.
Yeah, give a little history of it.
The BDS movement is 2005, officially started with by 2 men, Omar Barghouti and Mahmoud Abbas, the current leader of the Palestinian Authority, who I believe a very ethical person. I think he's on his 15th year of a 4-year term.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
Before we go on, BDS, we went over a little fast. What does it mean?
Boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
Okay.
It is modeled after the boycott of South Africa during the apartheid years, where where people were saying if South Africa continues to do to the black population what they're doing, being accused of apartheid, rightfully so. I mean, this was a real case. So boycotting, crippling the country economically, culturally, socially, mostly economically, really, would work. And a good ethical boycott, I have nothing against it. Okay? The problem is the BDS movement is nothing like that. So BDS, and it goes back way further. You can go back to Kristallnacht, 1938 in Germany, when there were boycotts and pogroms of Jewish businesses. So it goes back in history, and I think I talk about that in the book. But the BDS movement basically is trying to cripple Israel into submission, to stop being the apartheid country that it is, to stop doing the ethnic cleansing that it's doing. Of course, it's not.
Yeah, they're alleged, yeah.
Alleged. There are more Arabs today in Israel than there were in 1948. I think it's more than double. It's the opposite of ethnic cleansing, but nobody wants to see it that way. It's crazy. Yeah. So the BDS is saying, don't buy Israeli products. Don't invest in Israeli businesses, corporations, or if American corporations or any corporations from the world of the world are investing in America, in the Israeli products or doing things in Israel. Divest from them. Don't put your stock into them. And you know, it's working. I mean, the one that made the most noise is when Ben and Jerry's. Sorry for naming the name, but
No.
Ben and Jerry ice cream decided they were not gonna, they're gonna boycott Israel, and they have a long history of making the wrong choices. So they say basically, don't buy Israeli products. And I love to tell people, this is what Christians need to do. If you support Israel, go to a BDS website, like bdsmovement.org is one of them. Don't support that website, but go to their website and go to the list of all the products they list for you, saying they're Israeli products, you should not buy them. Now you've got your list, now you know what to buy. They've done the homework for you. It's all there.
You know, it's really important because as we talk about these can be very sensitive topics, and what happens often is, you take, again, no one here is saying that the state of Israel does everything perfectly by any means, like any other human government. Nobody does anything perfect. But what happens is you take maybe a mistake that the Israeli government or maybe the military does or whatever, and that's taken and that's blown up, and it's cast as the model of how they run things, when in fact, if you were to just use some common sense, and what I mean by that is, think about Israel as a military or handling some of the terrorism that's going on there. They go out of their way to avoid hurting civilians when we know that many of the terrorists, they'll set their camp up in a hospital, in a children's preschool. I mean, you think about that, and Israel will often put flyers out. What a contrast, right?
I have never heard of any country in the history of the world and all the wars that have been documented, of any country dropping leaflets to the effect of, tomorrow at noon, we're going to bomb. So take shelter or move away. This is ridiculous. This is not conventional warfare. This is caring about human life.
But you don't hear that in these particular movements. They bring up, again, one of the exceptions. But they don't say, hey, look at the way they're doing, because honestly, terrorism by definition, it's indiscriminate. They're killing children, they're killing women, and they just throw bombs out. They don't know where they're going to land.
And a perfect example of that, Mondo, is the 276-page report that just came out from Amnesty International. They've got the name and the reputation, but they're long gone from that reputation. And it started in 1962 by a British lawyer, but they're not what they used to be. And they've just put out this report laced with lie after lie after lie, and people are just buying it. I just wrote an analysis of that on my website, newantisemitism.com, where I have a lot of information there.
One of the things that you do as we wrap up here, the other book that's most recent, last year, The Time Is Now, 7 Steps Christians Should Take to Help the Jewish People. I think that's really the goal here. When we think about, we see the prophetic scenarios, we see the trends happening, we see all these things setting the stage, that it's here, and we know it's going to get worse. And Jesus mentions that just like birth pangs on a woman, contractions, things begin, but they increase in intensity and frequency. So when we see at the end this incredible, horrible anti-Semitism, we expect it to be here, and as you mentioned, it hasn't gone away, but some of it is coming back a little bit strong. What is a Christian? I mean, it's a short little book, but what can a Christian do?
Not everybody listening to us right now is going to be on the same page, but I'm premillennial, pre-trib, so I believe the rapture is going to take place before the 7-year tribulation, before the 1,000-year millennium, before the eternal order. But nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that it's not going to get bad before the rapture. Okay?
Agreed.
And I think you and I live in 2022 where it's getting bad, almost by the day. So it's going to get bad for the Jews. It's also getting bad for the Christians, okay, or anybody who's basically not agreeing with who's in charge. But right now, I see an opportunity for Christians not to again replay by the same rules that would happen 80 years ago and not be a bystander. I often say a bystander only facilitates the work of a perpetrator. If you don't do anything, you let it happen. In the building where my grandfather was taken when he was, when my mom was 15, they were across the courtyard, the family that would have given their life for the Jews. They loved the Jewish people so much, they had no idea this was happening. They would have given their lives to protect, to hide, And the rest of the building were people probably looking behind their shutters, going at what's going on with the Gestapo and the police coming to get the Jews, and didn't say anything. For whatever reason, they didn't say anything. They were bystanders. Just one person, or I don't want to lose my food tickets, or I don't want to lose my family, and whatever. So they didn't say anything. They didn't speak up. They didn't stand out. They said nothing. So I see an opportunity for Christians today, not in 5 years and 10 years, today, yesterday actually, to come to the rescue of their Jewish friends, to do something right now, because before the tribulation, it's going to get worse. And the question I have for you, if you have Jewish friends, is when your Jewish friend come in the middle of the night and say, they took my money, they froze my bank account, I don't have my car anymore, I cannot get into my house, it's too risky, I have nowhere to go, I know you're a Christian, can I come and stay with you? Are you going to look at your friend in the middle of the night and say, I'll pray for the peace of Jerusalem? Or are you going to say, come in, I'll take care of you? That's the question.
Amen. Where can people learn about your ministry?
The greater ministry is Chosen People Ministries. You're familiar with us. We've only been going for 127 years. We're a young ministry. I serve in the Dallas area as a regional director for the Southwest. Chosenpeople.com. I also have my own website, newantisemitism.com, where I post my articles and blogs and podcasts and videos, and where the people can get my books when you run out of my books. And also, I have a YouTube channel, Olivier Melnick Through Jewish Eyes, when I post a lot of teachings, a lot of news on anti-Semitism, and I want to invite all of you to come and subscribe to Olivier Melnick Through Jewish Eyes. There's a lot of stuff there that you won't find anywhere else. Appreciate you being here with me. Thank you.
As we wrap up this session, this prophecy update, what we know is that this isn't going away. And as Olivier said, we know Psalm 122 verse 6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but even more, it's our job as Christians to represent Scripture accurately, to bless Israel. Again, that doesn't mean agree with everything. You can bless people that you don't agree with. In fact, Jesus talks about blessing those that persecute you. So the blessing of God is meant to be, again, by the Holy Spirit on those that, again, are imperfect, like all of us. And so as we think about this, I encourage you to continue to grow, to learn, to be educated, but to watch these trends, because they're showing that Jesus' return, the arrival of the day of the Lord, and even before that, as we've talked in Luke 17, before the day of the Lord comes, the rescue happens and the rapture is going to happen. So we're excited about that. So thank you for watching today, and we will see you next time.